So you've already worked through these problems, or at least tried to. I'm going to run through this and just kind of talk through my thinking in case you were unable to follow along from the solution key. So number one here, we've already done in the notes video, so feel free to go back and look at that and see how we got pi over 6, 11, pi over 6. This worksheet is kind of, I call it a domino worksheet. It's not original to me, but the way it works is after you find your answers here, you have to put another number in here. You notice that 1 wasn't in the original problem. It's coming from this hint. The hint says put the number without pi from the numerator of the smaller answer into the next question. So if you look at the smaller answer, that'd be pi over 6. The numerator without pi. So what number is here without pi? Well, it's just a 1 pi. And so I put a 1 up here. And so now we're going to solve this equation. Now, we haven't really talked about this, but I know you guys are so bright that you could solve this without me walking through it here. You've got 2 cosine of x equals -1. So to get x by itself, we're going to divide both sides by 2. And then from there, we have to think through, how am I going to find x? Where is x so that I get -1 over 2? So hopefully you're thinking cosine is x over r. Where is x -1? And the radius is 2. So I drew -1 on my x. I made my radius 2. Hopefully you're realizing this is a 30, 60, 90 triangle, right? This is the square root of 3. And so if this is 60 degrees here, then this is 120, which gives me 2 pi over 3. So I've got 2 pi over 3. But I need another solution from 0 to 2 pi that has the same x value. That ends up being down here because the x value at this point is -1 as well. The y value happens to be -square root of 3, but we're not too interested in that right now. So my solutions here are 2 pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3. To get all the solutions going around the circle again and again and again, we have to add this 2k pi, where k is an element of z. And so here's our 2 solutions. The hint says put the denominator of the smaller answer into the next question. So that'd be 3. So we come up here and we put a 3 in here for number 3. And we've got to solve. Again, to get tangent by itself, I'm going to divide both sides by 3. That gives me tangent of x equals -1. Tangent, we know, is y over x. So this is going to be true. This is going to happen when I have 1 over -1 or -1 over 1. Either one of those will give me -1 here. And so I'm realizing when x is -1 and y is 1, I have a 45, 45, 90 triangle. So I know that's 45 degrees. Going to have a similar situation down here in the 4th quadrant. Only now y is -1 and x is 1. And so here we get 135 degrees, or 3 pi over 4. And then 2 pi is the same as 8 pi over 4, so I know it's 1 less, so 7 pi over 4 and 3 pi over 4. That gets me these 2 answers, but I need to think about all the solutions. So I have to add 2k pi, where k is an element of the integers. That gives me all the solutions. Now, tangent is interesting. You see how these are in a straight line here? There's a trick if you want. You can use 3 pi over 4. That gives me this. And then we can add just k pi. Notice it's missing a 2. Because if I add pi, that's 180 degrees. It will give me this solution. Then I can add pi again. It gives me the next solution. Add pi, it gives me the next, and so on. So this is an alternate way of writing this out. If you didn't follow that, that's fine. So now the hint says take the number without pi from the numerator of the larger answer. So that'd be the 7 here, and put it into the next question. So we put 7 in here. We now solve this. Notice this equation got a bit more complicated, but I'm just kind of undoing. I'm getting this is phi actually by itself, so I need to take away the 7 from both sides. Then I need to multiply both sides by 1/2, and the cosine phi is 0.4216. Then I need to get rid of the cosine, so I take the inverse cosine of both sides. Remember that? Inverse cosine of this side inverse cosine of this side. And so phi then is this. I type in the calculator. That gives me 65.1 degrees, which is here in the first quadrant. But since phi is x over r, we know that x is going to be the same in the fourth quadrant. So we take 360 minus 65.1. Since this is 360k, it's in degrees, so I go ahead and take 360 minus that and get 294.9. You could probably put 295 in there. And that gives me my two solutions. And then plus 360k is just going to add a circle each time, right, to get all the coterminal angles. The hint says put the digit in the hundreds place from the larger answer into the next question. So here, this would be 2, so we put 2 up here. And now, this is pretty complicated. This is actually getting into the next section, the next lesson for next week. So if you want to skip this for now, you can and come back to it. But it gives you a little preview for next week. You notice cosine squared u, cosine 1. This is reminding me of simplifying trig expressions and factoring. And so if you want, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to move everything to one side of the equation. Plus cosine u, subtract 1. We say this is in a quadratic form. You see the x squared form, x and a 1. And remember when we solved those, we got them equal to 0. If you want to think of this in terms of x's instead of cosines, you can. It'll look something like this. But if you think of it just in terms of cosine, I have 2 cosine u times cosine u, stop, there we go. And so to get cosine, 2 cosine squared, I need 2 cosine times cosine. That's going to give me 2 cosine squared u. To get minus 1, I need plus and minus 1. We can rearrange and get that middle term. But a negative 1 times a positive 1 is going to give me negative 1 here. And then this middle term works out. You see, that gives me positive 2 cosine u minus cosine u. That's going to give me 1 cosine u. From here, since I know this times this equals 0, that means that this has to equal 0, or this has to equal 0. So if this first expression equals 0, I can add 1, divide by 2. We know cosine u equals 1/2. Here, cosine u equals negative 1. And I can create my x over r. So x is 1, my radius is 2. We see that has to be 60 or pi over 3. I noticed later that this should be really 60 degrees to match here. And then this ends up being then going around here. So I have 60 degrees for reference angle. This is 300 degrees. And so this is 300 degrees. Now cosine u plus 1, we're going to subtract 1 from both sides. And since cosine is x over r, that's going to be negative 1 over 1. If you think about where that is on the circle, negative 1 on the x value is here. Radius is 1. This ends up just being pi, or 180 degrees. Okay. And I think originally there was a hint here, and then you put something in this box, but that got lost along the way, so we're not going to worry about it. But that is just a quick talk through of these problems. Don't get discouraged. Solving trig equations is challenging, but if you just keep working through it,